And anybody that doesn't get a 100% on the pop quiz has to listen to the sermon again. Bright eyes, everybody's listening. Nope. Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 4. All right, Proverbs chapter 4, verse 18 and 19. That's our text. Proverbs 4, verse 18 and 19. But the path of the just is as the shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble. So last Wednesday, we read a text from the book of Proverbs, and we talked about this concept of two different paths. We read the verse in Proverbs that says, an unjust man is an abomination to the just, and he that is upright in the way is an abomination to the wicked. And we talked about how that concept is pretty typical to the book of Proverbs, that he'll establish that there's two different lines of thought, and he'll contrast them. He'll tell you that here's path A, and if you're on path A, these are kind of the results that you can expect. And this is path B, and if you stay on this path, these are the kind of results that you can expect. This path produces this kind of outcome. And that's kind of what makes Proverbs such a helpful book as far as just practical things, right? We both know, or we all know, that the book of Proverbs isn't historical, really. There's not, a lot of historical references about what somebody did or somebody said. It's not really a doctrinal book. It's not meant to ground you as far as certain, truths about a certain person or a certain subject. It's just hit after hit of really good practical information. These are thoughts that Solomon has wanted to relay to his son. Typical life lessons, things that he has both by experience and by just the abundance of the wisdom that God had blessed him with, things that he was able to diagnose about life. Proverbs is fun because it's really easy to just kind of jump into different places. And you're never really too far from an established context, right? It's a lot different than some other books. When we came through the book of 2 Corinthians on Wednesday night, if you waited until chapter 10 to jump into those lessons, you really missed a lot of establishing what that book is about. You don't really suffer from that as much in the book of Proverbs. You're able to just kind of jump in and find these good practical lessons. But we started last week, and we talked about two ways, and we talked about how they were incompatible. And what I wanted to do tonight is just to give an example of that, just to show you, again, how the book of Proverbs works in developing those ideas. And I just want to look at a particular example. It tells us here in verse 18 and verse 19 of this chapter of how the path of the just is contrasted with the path or the way of the wicked. And we'll just kind of talk about that tonight and just see how Solomon develops that idea and the principles that he kind of draws out from that. Now, first of all, I want to give you the admonition. Here's the admonition that Solomon gives. It's really kind of a simple and short context. The whole series of thoughts really begins around verse 10 and is done by the end of the chapter. But in verse number 10, he begins his admonition. Hear, O my son, and receive my sayings, and the years of thy life shall be many. He begins by saying, all right, son, I need you to hear me out. I want you to listen to what I have to say. He also gives a key point that he notes often in the book of Proverbs. These ideas, these principles are the pathway to a long life. Now, everybody wants to live a long and happy life, right? Proverbs tells you that wisdom certainly makes that possible. Let me just read a couple of verses. You can turn these if you want to, but you don't have to. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 1 says this, "My son, forget not my law, but let thine heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to thee." How about Proverbs 3, verse 16? Length of days, after he's talked about wisdom, he says, length of days is in her right hand. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 11 says, "For by me thy days shall be multiplied, and the years of thy life shall be increased." You know, when you follow the path of wisdom, when you follow the path that is right, and you heed the principles that are laid before us, both in this book of Proverbs and in God's Word as a whole, you have certainly put yourself on a path more inclined and more conducive to success, to a longer life. Now, obviously, they're proverbs, right? These are the general principles of life. There is no way that you can guarantee yourself long life, right? There's nothing that you can do that is a safeguard on your life. Any one of us is susceptible to, any number of things happening to us. A car accident on the ride home, something, a disease befalling us. That's not really what he's getting at, though, as much as he's trying to relate to his son the principle that a clean life is conducive to a long life. The more inclined you are to give in to the things of this world and the things of the flesh, the more inclined you would also be to bring upon yourselves the destructive things that come with those things, right? So, son, he says, listen, and this will be great for you to hear and to heed, and the years of thy life shall be many. Son, this is the path that'll put you. This is the path to success. You want to live a long and happy life. These are the principles to follow. Verse 11: I have taught thee in the way of wisdom, and I have led thee in right paths. And that's important, right? Because that kind of sets up for us the two principles of wisdom. Both the way that we teach wisdom, we want to make sure that we tell people the right things. We want to make sure that we, when we talk to people about the way of wisdom, we teach them. We tell them the things that are right. We want to tell people what the Bible says, and we want to be as faithful to that as we possibly can. When people listen to us teach, we want them to know that it's come from a good, solid foundation. But Solomon follows that up in verse number 11 by not just saying that I've just taught thee in the ways of wisdom, I have led thee in the right paths. You always want to make sure, and we should try to make sure, that the way that we lead people matches the way that we're trying to teach people, right? We would want to make sure that not just that we're teaching and saying the things that people ought to do, but leaving the example of that ourselves. We really don't want to not have our lifestyle match our words, right? I think the old phrase is practice what we preach. We would certainly want to make sure that the way that we teach people, we believe that that's true. We believe that that's right. We believe it so much that that's the way we're going to live too, and lead in those similar paths. So that's really encouraging information there. To teach right and to lead right. Verse 12, when thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened, and when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. Now, Solomon encourages his son to know that he'll listen, if he'll follow this path, let's call it path A, the path that is right, the path of wisdom, the path of the just, the path of righteousness. He tells them that thy steps shall not be straitened, and when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble. This way is certainly much clearer of obstruction, things that would harm you, things that would bring your downfall. Now, you and I both know And he doesn't deny this. It's just not the point he's tackling right now. You and I know that even on path A, there's troubles. You and I know that path A has its own set of trials. There are the worries and there are the things that come along with life. That's not as much what he's getting at, as much as, again, he is contrasting two different ways and telling you that this way is much more likely to have some stumbling blocks as opposed to the other. This path is much more likely to make you stumble than the other path. So listen to what I'm saying, son, and this will keep you on the path where there are less obstacles to trip you up, less things to bring your downfall, less things to bring you harm. Verse 13, take fast hold of instruction. Let her not go. Keep her, for she is thy life. You always want to take firm hold on good instruction. And he says, don't let it go. Now, what would the opposite implication of that be, right? When he says, don't let her go, keep her, for she is thy life. If he's telling you that okay, if you will listen and take hold of good instruction, that this is the way to blessing. This is your life. What would the opposite implication of that be? Don't listen to the instruction. You're certainly back on that path that's more likely to lead to harm, lead to your downfall. This is the way. Hold on to these. Verse 14, the admonition. Enter not into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of evil men. Do not go that way. Okay? Don't walk in the pathway of evil men. Don't enter into the path of the wicked. That is helpful advice. That is foundational. And it's something that David would have learned, or Solomon would have learned years ago, hopefully from his own father, right? From David. What was the foundational psalm that Brother John brought us through, right? How does Psalm, right from the beginning, Psalm 1 begin? Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. He doesn't stand in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. This is foundational lesson, right? This is not a one generation. Solomon, if Solomon's son will listen to this, this will be good for him. Well, it was good for Solomon when David said it. It was good for Solomon's son when Solomon said it. It's good for us when the Bible tells it to us. Don't walk in this path. This is long established counsel in God's word. Don't enter into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of evil men. One thing that you will notice too about the book of Proverbs is that it is often very generic. It's general. You notice he's not really yet pointed out any particular sins as much, is he? That idea of not walking in the path of wicked men, that's kind of broad, isn't it? Apply it how you will. Apply it where it is necessary. Now in verse number 15, he's going to give us some really quick hits. What he mentioned there about the path of the wicked or the way of evil men. Notice these things in verse 15. Avoid it. Here's this path, okay? Path A is the good path. Path B is the good or the bad. Path A is the just. Path B is the wicked. He says avoid that path. Don't walk on that path. That's just right. He cuts right to the chase, gets right to the point. If you see the path of the wicked, don't walk in that, but you avoid that path. But then he follows it up and he says, pass not by it. In other words, not only should we avoid it, don't even ponder it, right? Don't even stop by to take a look. Keep a distance from it. You don't want to be the one that, well, I'm not on path A. I just kind of want to see what it's about, right? I just want to see, it seems like a lot of people are doing it. Let me just kind of sit here and kind of watch for a while. Nope, don't do that either, he says in verse 15. Pass not by it, right? The Bible tells us to abstain from all appearance of evil. We want to keep a distance from those things that lead themselves down that pathway. Turn from it. That is an intended focus the other way. You know, sometimes, and if we're not careful, Christians can struggle with this, right? Path A, this is the righteous path. This is the path of the just. This is the good way. And we're trying to walk on this path, but sometimes we talk about path B like, you know what? Boy, it'd just be so much easier if I could do that. And it's almost like we kind of grovel that we can't be over on path B, right? Like we're on path A, but we don't really want to be. We're doing it because we know it's the right thing to do, but if we had our druthers, we'd probably rather be over there having, you know, all the time that everyone's having on the other path. You know what he says? He says, turn away. Turn away from it. That implies an intended focus the other way. Don't look longingly at the path of the wicked just because you can't join in. Don't look longingly at that path because it looks like it's easier and it's not as narrow and it's not as difficult as the way that we're currently on. He says, turn from it. Verse 15, pass away. You know, when you look at the path, he calls it the path, the way of wicked men, the path of the wicked, however you want to define that. It might seem interesting. It might seem intriguing. It might seem that there's a lot of people on that path. It might seem that they're having fun. It might seem that that way is thrilling. This way over here might seem a little more lonely than that path because there's a lot more people on it. Solomon would tell his son, you stay away from that path. Don't gawk at it. Don't look for it. You turn and put your focus the other way. Don't pass by it. Don't look longingly at it. You turn your eyes and you turn your focus to the right way. Okay? Don't look at the other path and think about how much easier life would be or all the things that you could have. Turn your focus to this way, to this path, because there is a danger in that path. Now let's set up the contrast. That's number one was the admonition. Now let's look at the contrast. Verse 16. For they sleep not, except they have done mischief, and their sleep is taken away unless they cause some to fall. Now Solomon can warn and talk to his son about those that are on that path, and look at the things that can be said about them. Solomon says, you know, they're not even content unless they're involved in some kind of mischief, right? Unless they can cause some kind of hurt. What does he say? They sleep not. Their sleep is taken away. You ever get to the end of a day and have regret? Like maybe you just wasted the day, you know, or you had opportunity to do something that you should have done and you didn't do it. And you just feel that sense of regret, right? That you didn't do enough. You didn't work as hard as you should have worked. You left a bunch of things undone. You kind of fell through. Maybe you let somebody down, somebody that was depending on you. You get to the end of the day and you're just bothered because you just laid an egg that day, right? You just didn't do great. And that bothers you at the end of the night. You know what Solomon tells his son? These people, when they get to the end of the night, when they go to lay on their bed, here's why they have regret. Because they didn't cheat somebody enough. Because they didn't do enough mischief. Because they didn't bring someone harm. Just as those that care about what's right, it bothers them, and sometimes it even keeps them awake that they didn't do right, that they couldn't get the job done. These, he says in verse 16, they lose sleep because they haven't done enough mischief. That's a rotten way to live. But Solomon says this is kind of what I've found of people that walk this path. That's how they live. That's what they live for. The mischief is a high to them, and they regret when they haven't done enough. He continues on in that in verse 17. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. Wickedness and violence, that's their diet, right? That's where they cut their teeth. That's how they make their bones. That's what they do. That's what they enjoy. That's their diet. That's a sharp contrast from what the Bible tells us. Jesus, right? What did Jesus say in the Gospel of John? What is my meat? My meat is to do the will of him that sent me. Isn't that what Jesus said? And yet Solomon could say, here's these guys. Here's what they dine on. Here's their diet. Violence and wickedness. That's just what they enjoy. That's how they make their day. That's a graphic picture. Look at Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 23. Proverbs 11, verse 23. He says, the desire of the righteous is only good, but the expectation of the wicked is wrath. And we kind of talked about that a little bit last week, right? That we're not even talking about thinking the same way. The desire of the righteous, it's good. The expectation of the wicked, it's wrath. And here's a guy that's not content unless he's caused mischief. And here's a guy that lives, breathes, he eats and drinks mischief and violence and wickedness. And he's cautioning his son, just this is what's on that path. This is what that path produces. It looks harmless from the beginning, and yet what you find shortly are folks on this path that now they just can't get enough. They just can't get enough of it, and they're entrenched in it. So that gives us our text. Verse 18 and verse 19 of chapter 4. The path of the just is as a shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble. So here's the contrast. He said, son, there's two ways. There is the path of the just. Okay, that path of righteousness, that path of wisdom, the path of the just. And here's what he says. He says it's like the shining light. And it shines more and more unto the perfect day. What does that mean? He's talking about this path. If you can picture the rising sun. And as the sun rises, you know what happens? It gets brighter. And it gets brighter. And it gets brighter. And then sure enough, it's not too long. Right around midday, it hits its peak, right? And it's as high in the sky as you can imagine, and it's as bright as you can imagine, and it finally peaks. And he talks about that's what this path is like. It's like it just keeps getting better and better. It's as a shining light. This path of the just is pictured like walking in light, right? That seems to be another analogy that's pretty common to Scripture, right? Thy word is a lamp to my feet. It's a light to my path. It's interesting that he would use the analogy that it just shines more and more. It's like it keeps getting better and better and better. You get the impression that though path A would have its own troubles, though path A might have its own trials, as all paths would, on this path there's no regret. Right? There's no looking back. It's just, it keeps getting better. It keeps getting better. And so, son, that's what this path is like. Right? It's beautiful. It's lighted. It gets better and better. It's like the sun that just comes up in the morning and it keeps getting brighter and brighter and brighter until it peaks. But what about the other path? Path B, that's verse 19. The way of the wicked is as darkness. They know not at what they stumble. They don't have a lighted path. You know what happens when you walk in darkness? You ever been outside and there's no light? See, we don't have that problem because your all's Uncle Kevin has that big old light that's out there. We almost never go outside of our house and it's totally dark, right? It's never really totally pitch black. But you can imagine, or try to imagine, because places that you've been where it is dark, right? And you could imagine that if we go behind our house and we went into the woods far beyond now where we could see that light and it's just dark and you can't see the stars because you're in the woods and you can't see any other lights or anything like that. You know what happens when you're out walking in the dark? you're prone to danger. You can't see where you're walking. You could stumble across a big old, stump, a limb, critter, right? You better hope that was a tree limb and not a snake, right? If you walk in dark, you're never actually sure, are you? And you know what you got to do when you walk in the dark? You got to tread real soft and light, and you got to walk slowly. You don't have any, no clarity, no understanding where you're at, what's going on. It's dark. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 15 says that good understanding giveth favor, but the way of transgressors is hard. Not only is it not like path A, right? Path A just gets better and better, like no regrets. It shines more and more into the perfect day. Over here on this path, it's just dark. It doesn't get lighter and lighter. There's no clarity. There's no rising sun that's coming. It's just, you just stumble on in darkness. And so I think that you can see that this is kind of typical of what you would see throughout the book of Proverbs. And as Solomon tries to teach his sons these lessons, what did we say? He likes to set up two different ways, two different paths, and contrast them. Here's the path of the just. Here's the path of the wicked. And here's the contrast. Son, it's like night and day. Okay? These ways, like we talked about last week, they're not compatible. They're not the same way. And it's not like, jumping back and forth on this way, this path is like the shining light. And this path over here is like walking in darkness. And just the way that is expressed, if I were to tell you that this path is like walking in the light, where the light shines and it gets better and better, and I tell you that this path over here is like walking in darkness, and you don't know what comes next, and you don't have any idea what you're doing, and you could trip and fall over anything. Which way do you think is better? It kind of explains itself, doesn't it? Just the way that it's presented. Son, I'm going to set before you two different ways, and they're as different literally as night and day. The contrast could not be any more different. This path over here is broad. It's wide. And there's a lot of folks on it. But son, you got to be careful about that path because that one's dark. And this one over here is narrow. And there's not as many people on it. It'll probably be more lonely. It'll have its own set of troubles as opposed to the other. But this one's lit. This one's shining, and it just gets better and better. Now, is this easy? Is it easy to make the right choice? You would think that it should be, but you and I both know that it's not always that easy. There is a tug at this flesh. There is something within us that struggles with temptation and desire. And so notice some of the things that he's going to hit right here at the end. He rehearses again the admonition in verse 20. My son, attend to my words, incline thine ear unto my sayings. Just like he said before, son, listen to me, got to hear me. Let them not depart from thine eyes, keep them in the midst of thine heart. For they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh. I'm telling you, this path is better for you. This way, if you'll listen, it's better for you in the long run. So do these four things. Verse 23, keep your heart. Watch your heart. That inner man, right? That inner man, the heart, the seat of desire, the seat of emotion. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. You got to start right in here, both in the mind and heart, thinking right, wanting right. Verse number 24, keep your mouth. Watch what you say. Put away from thee a froward mouth, and perverse lips put far from thee. Start talking right. Of course, right? Start wanting right, start thinking right, start talking right. How about verse 25? Let thine eyes look right on, and let thine eyelids look straight before thee. Right? Keep your focus. You gotta be focused. Nobody's going to pretend that this is easy. right? It's hard sometimes to make wise decisions. And yet Solomon would encourage his son, okay, then look right on. You take your eyes and you focus, okay? You look right on. You let your eyelids look straight before thee. He kind of establishes what that means. You know, you're not turning to the left hand or to the right hand. You have to set your mind and set your eyes a particular way and not get distracted by how good something else looks, how enticing something else might be. Focus, okay? You've got to have a determined focus. If you want to do what's right, you got to have some grit and desire to do it, because there's a lot of temptation. There's a lot of pull to go on the wrong path, isn't there? In this world, just as a warning, kids, and warning to the adult, there's a lot of pull to go the other way. There's a lot that's enticing. There's a lot that would pull us that way. Solomon says, stay focused then. You keep your eyes straight. In verse 26, the fourth thing, your feet, ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Son, mind your walk. Mind which way you're walking. I'm going to tell you the truth that there are two different paths you could walk on right now, and they're as different as night and day. You walk on this path, health, long life, the blessings of life. It gets better and better, and there's no regrets, right? You walk on this path, darkness, trouble, a company that ultimately sees no desire but to continue in mischief, and their meal is wickedness and violence. Son, here's the two paths. I'm telling you that this is where these paths end up. So choose wisely, okay? And that's one of the things I think, just to kind of go back to the introduction again, I think it's so helpful about a book like the book of Proverbs, is that the analogies that are used, the comparisons that are used, they kind of paint mind pictures. You can actually kind of see it, a path that's lit and a path that's super dark, but it's not incredibly deep. Son, choose the path of wisdom. Choose the path of righteousness, the path of the just. Because these two ways, they don't really mingle. They're not really compatible. But you do. You have the choice before you to choose path A or path B. And he admonishes his son, okay, choose wisely. And that's the encouragement from God's word to us, would be the same. All right. All right. Let's all stand together.